Hey sketchy friends, Domestika have done it again. They have brought one of my favourite urban sketches to the screen. I love the style of this urban sketcher so much that I'm actually booked onto her workshop in New Zealand in April for the Urban Sketches Symposium. Her name? Eleanor Doughty, otherwise known as Herb Coil over on Instagram. I've been a big fan of Eleanor's style for a long time now. She is based in Seattle and is a freelance illustrator, and she goes into her background of how she came to be where she is right now further in the course over on Domestika. One of my favourite parts across all Domestika classes is the video called My Influences in the introduction section. It is always such a great opportunity to hear about the influences of the artist or creative that I'm watching, and they more often than not reference artists completely out of their own field in different genres or different tracks of creativity. So for example, Eleanor mentions some animators, some directors, and she also references the philosophy of wabi-sabi as well. This particular class is super well structured, and it takes you from Eleanor explaining her art materials right the way through to a finished illustration with every step in between. Eleanor's style is quirky and perhaps not for everyone, so I do recommend going to have a look at some of her work over on Instagram, for example, just to check out whether you like her style, and if so, then you can go and check out the class a bit more over on Domestika. As you've probably already gathered, I'm fascinated by Eleanor's style, so to be able to take this class and really take a deep dive on her process and see how she does things, how she makes certain decisions, all before taking her face-to-face workshop, I think is super beneficial, because I can kind of think about the things that she said in the Domestika class and what she showed, and maybe even come up with some ideas or questions based on that when I do get to meet her in April. I would definitely recommend this class for beginners. I think it's completely appropriate for beginners. Eleanor takes you from the start. She explains things really simply but concisely as well. She shows her step-by-step process of how she builds up the different layers of her illustration process. So if you're into urban sketching, or if you want to draw urban scenes from photos, I really recommend this class, because she covers tricky things like adding people and cars and showing motion and that kind of thing. She covers the basic techniques of watercolor, things like wet on dry, wet on wet, that kind of thing. And she also talks about composition and producing thumbnails. She does this if she feels like the scene is particularly overwhelming. And a little thing that I picked up is that she uses dotted paper to do her thumbnails, which I think is really smart, because it's so much easier to produce multiple thumbnails in proportion to each other just by having the dotted paper to draw on. So I'm definitely going to steal that one. Thanks, Eleanor. I feel like I really vibe with Eleanor's approach to sketching. She mentions quite a few things that I found myself nodding along with. For example, she takes a more intuitive and observational approach to perspective, which I really appreciate. And she also shows, making slight mistakes and how it's like not really a big deal, how she can fix them or obscure them, and basically tells us not to worry, which I really resonate with, and is something that I think I also try and emphasize in a lot of my videos as well. I really enjoyed watching Eleanor lay down loose watercolor washes over the top of a very rough pencil sketch with a big brush, and then how she built her layers on top of that. And I really enjoyed the different art materials she used. She doesn't use anything too crazy, but she does use water-soluble markers and watercolor pencils as well. And I really enjoyed seeing how she intentionally utilized the properties of those water-soluble materials to show things like movement and things in motion. So my personal three, although there were many more than this, my personal top three learning points from this course were to restrict color schemes within a sketch. It is something I know in my brain, and it's something I'm aware of, but actually watching her practically apply this and watching her demonstrate this idea actually has kind of I don't know, turned a few switches in my brain. So that's definitely something I want to bear in mind or even focus on moving forward in the near future. I also took away her use of water-soluble materials, as I just mentioned, how she uses them so intentionally to show movement and in different layers. So that's another thing that I really would like to try out in my own work. And the third thing is her use of heavy black lines in the building right in the foreground, and then using a different color for another part of the building that's slightly behind, and how that doesn't draw as much attention and it lets the front of the building really stand forward. I really enjoyed watching that, and it's even something I've done a demonstration of on my own Patreon channel about a year ago, but it's so easy to kind of forget these different techniques. And again, watching Eleanor demonstrate it really made me enthusiastic about it again and reminded me about that technique. So again, it's something else I want to try out in my work soon. I definitely recommend checking out this Domestika class by Eleanor, especially if you've looked at her work and you really like her style. You can go and watch the trailer over on Domestika. I've put the link to the class in the description below. Also, if you want more demonstrations from me, I do weekly demos over on Patreon. I use different styles, techniques and supplies to create different sketchbook explorations. I always provide the reference photos as well to encourage you to hopefully have some of your own creative breakthroughs, and actually to encourage you to try different things, stepping outside of your comfort zone, trying different techniques and styles to push your own sketching forward. So the link to Patreon is in the description below as well. So this is a good moment to remind myself and yourself and ourselves that it's always good to be a perpetual student and to retain a beginner's mind. Forget everything that you think you know. Be open-minded to watching and learning from others in any way you can. There is always more to learn, and there is always more ways to improve. So on that Zen-shaped nugget of wisdom, I'll leave it there. Namaste.